I want to say congratulations for NEF, because I think you've raised the quality of the debate around this issue in asking some of the very difficult questions we've got to answer, and I hope today we can add value to it. So well done, NEF. I must say they came to see me early on, and I assumed they were coming to talk about supporting HS2 when we were looking at HS1, and I was therefore rather taken aback when I found their scepticism, and I've learned a lot from it. It's particularly topical for us, I think, today, because the spotlight is on the Department for Transport and the government following the fiasco of letting the franchise on the West Coast main line. And I think the two are connected, because the question that we've been set is how you examine the value of HS2, and Department for Transport haven't got the best of records at doing that. I declare a Public Accounts Committee interest in this. We will be following this vigorously, because there is a lot of public money at stake. And I think I also haven't a view, although I have become somewhat more sceptical over time, but I just think that I am sceptical when the Department for Transport is over-optimistic about passenger numbers, which they consistently are in their evaluation of all major rail projects. I'm sceptical about their absurd assumptions around inflation and growth, although it's hugely difficult if you're looking in the longer term to get those right. I do get concerned if all alternative options haven't been properly evaluated before coming to a rational decision. And I want the assumptions at least to be transparent. And when we looked at, I think it was HS1 in the East Coast, we found that some of those assumptions were absurd. For example, the value of a business traveller versus a commuter, with the assumption that if you're a business traveller on an intercity net railway, you don't do any work. Whereas we all know it's the one bit of time when you're on your own and you can actually get on with it uninterrupted. And assumption about ticket prices. But if all that's right, I remain to be convinced of the case either way. I think what I would ask is that we're clear about our objectives, that we're transparent about the costs and assumptions, and that we're open about the outcomes. And if we can have that, then we might take a good decision.
At NEF, we think this is a really important discussion. We think this is a really important decision, and important that we get it right. As Margaret mentioned, we are conducting some research into the HS2 decision. It's independent, we're independently funded, and at the moment we genuinely have no position on whether or not the scheme should proceed. Our interest is really in ensuring that the decision is as fully informed as it can be, in terms of the value of the scheme and alternatives as well, the value of the scheme to UK society, particularly because it's such a large scheme, more than £30 billion in investment for the full Y network, which obviously carries high opportunity costs with it. And at this point, I think we would feel, I mean, John Armitt mentioned, you read the benefit cost analysis and still the value comes across as being quite murky. And despite the quantity of analysis that has taken place, the debate is still very polarised. We have proponents of the scheme on the one hand who believe very strongly it will deliver strong economic growth, it will deliver future capacity that's much needed, and from this perspective, the appraisal probably hasn't recognised the full value. On the other side of the debate, we have the opponents of the scheme who are fearful that the way the analysis has been conducted has been quite biased in favour of the scheme. They have concerns about methodological approaches in the cost-benefit analysis, and particularly around that, referring to something that Margaret mentioned earlier, the over-optimistic assumptions, and really that the case depends on those over-optimistic assumptions, and even then only delivers what looks like a relatively low return in transport terms. In our view at NEF, because we really are taking a look at the decision-making process, we think that the problem with the polarised debate is that it misses something very, very important in making such a big decision. And that is that it's really critical to appraise this scheme and alternatives against the objectives that the government and society thinks are really important for the nation. That leads to a slightly different question then. It leads to a question that's about, well, how far would different alternatives take you in meeting your national ambitious objectives. And just to recap very, very quickly, because it can be a bit difficult to be absolutely clear on what the objectives are, actually the documentation around the appraisal aren't terribly clear. You have to sort of piece it together. But from ministerial statements, we can tell that it's kind of fourfold. First of all, it's very much about capacity. It's about relieving congestion and building for future capacity on the rail. Secondly, it's about catalysing economic growth for the nation. And then thirdly, specifically, a point about trying to repair the north-south divide and going some lengths to do that. Finally, that this can be a contribution to a low-carbon future. We think that such varied and ambitious goals require varied and ambitious alternatives to be considered alongside one another. What we have at the moment, though, is alternatives that are classic rail alternatives on quite a small scale, several orders of magnitude lower in cost terms than HS2. The danger is that that can lead to a bias in favour in cost-benefit terms. It can inflate the value, the apparent value of HS2. And moving on to the value for money element of the appraisal, it's attracted a lot of attention. Numbers always do, and there have been some controversies about the way it's been conducted. But it is a key tool for understanding how far you can go in meeting your objectives. What kind of outcomes will different packages of investments produce, and how much value? And this isn't to wave away the uncertainties which are inherent in this kind of, we're talking 60-year project. Of course there are going to be uncertainties. It's difficult to get growth forecasts right. It's difficult to get passenger demand forecasts right. And there are some items like wider economic impacts that are very difficult to value, for sure. But with those uncertainties and risk factors in a scheme as large as this, what we think is that the cost-benefit analysis approach can help produce a burden of proof to stand up to scrutiny and to provide enough confidence that there will be a positive return on the most likely scenarios that the scheme will deliver value for society. And we are particularly concerned at NEF that the London to West Midlands line, the benefit-cost ratio in that case has been falling steadily over the last 2 years, and it currently lies in the upper end of the low value for money range as set by the Treasury. So to sum up, I just say at NEF we very much welcome bold objectives for challenging times, which was what we're in. And we support the need for infrastructure investment across the country, very much so. But more than ever, we would say this is not a time to be cavalier in any way with society's scarce resources, and this is a big investment of funds. So just to leave on the critical question as we see it, which is not to ask, is HS2 a good investment, but instead to ask, is HS2 the best investment for achieving the ambitious goals that we might all stand behind?